What went right? What went wrong for the Bengals on Sunday against the Giants? Well, they won. Let's dive into the film and see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Jake Lisco and Mike Santaga to discuss it coming up next.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm James Erpine. Make sure that you download the Game Time app because today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today's show, can be found anywhere you get your podcast. So please follow, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. And thank you so much for making us your first listen or view here on YouTube. And this intro is specific to YouTube because, full disclosure, we had some technical issues on the back end. And so Jake caught up with Mike on Monday to discuss Sunday's game. And the video, we don't have the video anymore, but we have the audio. And so I made it a video in video form. I wanted to come on and show you that, we're aware that this is me tossing to an audio file here, but a lot of great insight on Joe Burrow, the offense, what went right on defense, what needs to improve, as Jake Lisco talked with Mike Santagata. So it's going to certainly look a lot different than you've ever seen before. This is a one-time thing that we hope never happens again, but it was a really good conversation between Jake and Mike. So without further ado, I'm going to toss to it. Again, this is an audio waveform that you're going to be seeing for the next 30 minutes or so right here on Locked On Bengals. Here's my co-host, Jake Lisco, talking with Mike Santagata.
And Mike, we're going to start, as we often do, with Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals offense that coming into this game was on a hot streak of scoring, 35 points a game over the last 3 games, and high expectations against a Giants defense that looked capable but flawed. Perhaps we underrated the Shane Bowen presence and his historical success with the Titans against the Cincinnati Bengals, but there were issues throughout the offense, as we and anyone who watched the game could have noted. There were times that Joe Burrow didn't look great. There were times that the play calls made you scratch your head. There were times that the offensive line had issues holding up against Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Ojulari. There were times that Jamar Chase dropped a pass, or they had personnel on the field that made you scratch your head. Let's start with Joe Burrow, though. He was pretty self-critical after the game. He did not play the kind of game we've seen him play the last 3 weeks, and while the highlights were there in a couple of downfield passes on the left side outside of structure, it feels like when the Bengals play against Shane Bowen defenses, Joe Burrow really seems to struggle within the structure and what they're trying to call more often than not. What did you see when you evaluate that kind of claim when you watch the way Burrow played on tape?
Yeah, it felt like, I think he said he didn't get into a rhythm and maybe didn't have a good sense of, what looked to me is that he didn't have a good sense of the timing of everything. It didn't feel like he had a good internal clock. There were times where he's checking it down early. We've seen that a lot, especially early in the year. It seems like he gets that kind of happy feed of let's just check this down, live to play another day, which is okay thinking until it becomes stifling of your offense, where that's just a once in a while thing. Okay. But when you're punting the ball because you keep checking it down, that's not ideal.
And it's a balance, right? Because in years past, we've talked about how when he's playing with an excellent sense of timing, those checkdowns are coming in a perfect spot and they're leading a player to space, and you're not checking it down to Chase Brown getting drilled as he tries to catch the ball and then he ends up dropping it. It's a different kind of checkdown when Joe Burrow is playing at a high level within structure.
And it was weird, though, because he also had plays where it felt like he thought he had a little bit more superhero to him than I think, he does without. I think he moves well in the pocket, but you could think of that boot play with Ojulari, and respect to Ojulari's length, that was pretty insane for him to make that tackle, but he makes the play and then gets sacked, and that's on him. Think of the play against Dexter Lawrence. He's trying to stiff arm Dexter Lawrence instead of getting the ball out. That's not a winning business model, to have your quarterback trying to stiff arm the 360-pound monster. And then just a few other turn downs. they ran that play with Trent Irwin on the field. Trent Irwin's only target. That wasn't to Irwin. That was supposed to go to Chase Brown. But I feel like Burrow thought he had something if he didn't just take the easy first down, went going for the kill shot instead. Just a few times, something like that happens. And then there was the turn down to T. Higgins of the play action that ended up in the intentional grounding. And that's just, you got your guy one-on-one, and he's got a step against the corner. Yeah, that corner is really fast, and he's probably faster than T. But I trust T with a guy that's out of phase trying to chase him to make a contested catch, or at least the ability to try to make that contested catch, especially if he's one-on-one without safety help. So I felt like it was a very up and down game for Burrow. I think when it mattered most, he was really good. You talk about the out of structure, that 3rd and 12, that was an awesome roll to his left, throw the ball down the field. There was also the one to chase that he just kind of put it up there. And that was actually what I'm talking about with T, is like when that corner's out of phase, his head's turned, it's a little easier for those wide receivers to make that play, just like the chase play there. He made some plays in structure to T, but it just felt overall like things weren't coming out on time, in rhythm. Felt like the eyes were a little messy. He had that awesome scramble very early, but other than that, it didn't feel like he had a sense for the game. It didn't seem like he was seeing the field that well, really. And he was still able to come over with a win, put enough on the field to get out of there. And it wasn't all on him. I'm not trying to say that either, but he wasn't able to take the team and let them rise above when other factors were letting him down, where we've seen that the past couple of weeks, where a guy could miss a block or something and makes him miss, throws the ball down the field, or takes the shot from that defensive lineman, like we saw in the Ravens game a couple times, and still throws the ball down the field to an open receiver.
Yeah. He did make some plays, so this isn't meant to be a disparaging to Burrow segment, but it wasn't the kind of game that we've grown accustomed to from him in the last few weeks, where the Bengals offense has been rolling. And I mean, that's obvious to anyone who watched, like I said. One of the things that kind of stands out when Joe Burrow doesn't have a game that we've grown accustomed to from Joe Burrow is the intermediate part of the field usually has a letdown stat line. When this sort of thing happens, Joe Burrow 1 for 3 on those attempts in the 10 to 20 yard range of the football field for 14 yards. So not only not attempting throws in that part of the field, but also only completing one of them. He did have the Jamar Chase drop there. Those numbers would look very different if Jamar Chase catches the ball. The other thing that really stands out to me, and this is a PFF split, is Joe Burrow on play action in this game was not effective. The play action game in general, not effective. On non-play action plays in this game, Joe Burrow was 14 for 18 on 24 dropbacks, which means, yes, they faced some pressure, but that's also where his long touchdown run came from. He did have 2 scrambles on non-play action plays, obviously, both of those successful scrambles. On play action plays, though, instead of 141 yards on 18 attempts for 7.8 yards per attempt, Joe Burrow was 5 for 10 on play action plays for just 6.7 yards per attempt on 11 dropbacks. So the play action game also not effective, and something that's supposed to be an easy button for quarterbacks, quote unquote, was not that for the Bengals against the Giants.
Yeah, and that includes the play to Brown that I mentioned. Is like your easy buttons there, just take it. Sometimes you just take the easy first down. You don't need to go make the superhero
And
play.
it's not just Burrow, to be abundantly clear. There are other issues for this offense to talk about. Jamar Chase generally was good in this game, but he had a drop on what could have been a critical play. T. Higgins was awesome in this game. He deserves plenty of credit. And honestly, the offensive line, while up and down, and they had their share of struggles, they probably did enough that the offense could have performed better overall. We will make sure we discuss how the offensive line played. We'll get into play calling. A lot of people I know were very frustrated with Zach Taylor, both during the game and today, as we're recording this, the day after the game. That frustration, I think, still exists, Mike. So we will hit those topics, as well as making sure we shout out the positive performances on the offensive side of the ball coming up next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by FanDuel. And believe it or not, the Bengals, after being 3.5-point road favorites in New York and covering, are 4.5-point favorites against the Cleveland Browns on the road for their first AFC North road game, according to FanDuel. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Either betting just on the money line or checking out some stats or what's going on in the middle of the game with FanDuel, you can see live play-to-play and so much more information in the same place where you place your bets with FanDuel. Not only that, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can check it out today at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel.com. This episode of Locked On Bengals is also sponsored by Prize Picks, daily fantasy done right. The only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players is injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, for example, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. Right now, if you sign up with Prize Picks, you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to get that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. They also have weekly promotions with Prize Picks that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. On Tuesdays, you will get discounts on selected player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. You can check it out today and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get that $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, one word, to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Mike, let's talk play calling. A lot of folks pretty upset with Zach Taylor in this game. We'll get to the offensive line after we discuss play calling, but this is a relatively hot button issue and a topic that has drawn a lot of consternation from fans this year. What were your thoughts when you reviewed play calling in this game? The one that stands out to me the most upon reflection is the Mike Gesicki blocking Brian Burns play. Was there anything else that kind of had you scratching your head?
I think when you got to the 4-minute drill, what I really scratched my head on was then trying to run your draw and wind back plays where the Giants are selling out to stop run there. Like those plays are great when they're getting upfield trying to rush the passer, but you need to kind of get some downhill stuff to work when you're trying to run 4-minute drill and chew some clock and run when they know you're running. Other than that, I think some of that is like the play calling looks worse when the quarterback's turning down some of the stuff that's open too. It's not like the play calling was great, but I felt like it could have looked better, and it was okay. It wasn't terrible. It was okay enough that it should have been all right when it ended up being pretty bad most of this game, the offense in general. So it's a two-pronged attack there where the quarterback's kind of turning some of the stuff down that's open, but also maybe they're not running the stuff that the quarterback is that comfortable with, or they didn't get to a lot of the stuff that worked against the Ravens, but it's a different defense too. So they're not playing it the exact same way. And then you get a drop here and a fumble there and everything looks worse. But yeah, I didn't love the play calling. I felt like there were some issues. I also felt like early on, so many quick possessions that they were, when you have one bad play in that group, it kind of stinks the whole thing up. And I don't know. I didn't love the play calling. I don't think it's a crutch that you can just say the entire offense falls on Zach Taylor, because I thought I saw some stuff that was open in the structure of the play. I think the run game, up and down, like the two plays, like you talked about the Gesicki, but that's a huge misuse of your resources. Not only just to use Gesicki there, but if you're going to run power from that situation or tackle trap or whatever they're doing, long trap, I think there with the tackle, doesn't matter. That tight end should be on the ball in a tighter split, because his whole goal there is just to cut that guy off. When he's off the ball and a little wide in his split, and who knows, maybe it's Gesicki that's just lining up a little bit wider than he's supposed to, but that could also lead back to the coach of like, why is Gesicki the guy in there? He has to get in the way. And they've tried this a few times with Gesicki where they have him trying to block the backside end, and it doesn't work. He cannot block a defensive end. That's just put in either Drew Sample or Eric All in that situation. You'll get better results, but especially just put him on the ball and put him down into the 3-point stage. Just let him come off the ball and get in that guy's way, because he couldn't even get in his way because of the distance. There was a gap already between the two, and he's not a particularly strong, long blocker that's going to be able to overcome that. So that was frustrating. I feel like there are plenty of frustrating moments within the game, but I also think you probably could have done more to get Jamar Chase the ball, at least early. It felt like he had the drop for sure, but T. Higgins running that speed out RPO, I thought I saw access for Chase on some of those too, but it didn't seem like he was the one running the route on it. So those are just quick hitters. I like that they got to some RPOs. They haven't done that in a long time. And those are high floor plays, not high ceiling plays to me, but high floor plays that will get 7 yards when you need 7 yards because you have those awesome talents out there. But just find a way, not from the backfield, to get Jamar Chase the ball in space. I actually liked that they went to some Chase Brown screen work. I know the one play gets kind of talked about a lot, but they also ran a play that was pony personnel, 21 look. There are 2 running backs on the field, not a fullback, and throwing him a screen out wide with Zach Moss in the backfield. And it went for a pretty good gain. So I think there's blame for the play calling. I think there's some credit. I think they just need to, it really feels like Zach Taylor, to me, his worst flag in play calling is that he has these plays in his mind that are like part of the script or part of like, this is going to work. And he doesn't think as much about the situation involved in there as well, where it's like the first play didn't work. You can't then go to whatever, or like the screen call on 2nd and 12 is kind of a whatever play when you have a good quarterback. Really just, why don't you let him cook a little bit there instead of trying to call a screen? That just feels like you're not playing to your quarterback's strength.
Yeah. And it's hard as well when maybe your feel for the game as a head coach is Burrow is turning things down in structure and isn't seeing things as well. And that is always a balance. I do want to take this moment to shout out T. Higgins, who was unambiguously awesome in this game. Some really tough concentration catches over the middle of the field where he's taking hits. Really good run after catch on the right sideline when they're backed up in their own territory. Didn't lead to anything specifically on that play, but T. Higgins was the reliable T. Higgins that you need him to be in this game. And it's just another point for the pay T. Higgins argument, I think, because he showed his consistent importance to this offense. And if teams are going to spend as much resources as they did at times in the New York Giants to take away Jamar Chase, and one of the flaws, I think, when you're talking about play calling is finding ways to get the ball to Jamar Chase earlier in the game is another one that, like, when you don't manufacture those touches for Jamar until the second half, don't love that. When you have those guys, you got to use them earlier, put some fear into the Giants, especially when you're not punishing them with the ground game when they try to take those guys away. So that's another bit there, but just wanted to shout out T. Higgins. Last question from a schematic perspective before we talk about the offensive line. What were the Giants doing defensively? Was it a matter of not getting to the right route concepts at times to try to beat what the Giants were doing defensively, or was it just turning down some stuff within structure and trying to at times get too cute is the other thing with Taylor? Like the Gesicki play, what I was thinking about when you're saying that is the Gesicki play and the Irwin play. You have 2 plays where your personnel would tell you we're doing the opposite thing, and they're trying to zig when they're thinking the Giants are going to expect to zag. When you have Gesicki on the field, you're expecting that the Giants are going to play pass because that's what Gesicki does. When you have Trenton Irwin and Andre Yosevich on the field, and Jamar Chase is off the field, and T. Higgins has to get some trainers to look at his shoulder because he just took a big hit. You got 12 personnel. Defense is probably expecting run, and they try to throw a pass out of play action. So there's a couple plays there where they try to do some tendency breakers. But overall, is it just calling the wrong things at the wrong times where they're having issues, or was that much of an issue in this game?
I think it's both. Like there are times the defense just had them where they ran some stuff right into defenders. And I mean, that just happens over the course of a game sometimes, but it does feel like Bowen has a little bit of a beat on this offense and be able to put his guys in a position to make those plays and just recognize the route concepts that the Bengals like to run. It seemed like the sucker play, the wrap, the bow, whatever, they had a better feel for that than the last couple of teams. That little sit route from the underneath and then the wrap in behind it felt like they did a better job of defending that, other than one play where Jamar Chase ran the sit route and T. Higgins wrapped behind it, and Burrow had to open that window. Was
that the play where Jamar's coming out of the backfield?
Yes. Yeah. So his gravity, and Joe Burrow used his shoulders and a pump fake to move that underneath defender to open up that window to T. Higgins. But overall, it does feel like they need to find not a tendency breaker in terms of like personnel and where they can go, but they need a tendency breaker of like, they need to just run some different route concepts against this team. And I've seen some, so I think they have those opportunities. Like they ran that big post and whatever else against the Ravens. I think it was available in this game too, but they ran some man coverage early. I feel like Joe Burrow's answer to that was just running, and then they kind of stopped. They're like, okay, no, can't run man coverage, just disrespect him entirely running the ball. And then they moved to playing a lot more zone and, changing the safety shell over the top, just things Bowen's done before. Not a ton of blitzing either, from what I remember, a little bit at the beginning, and then it felt like they just played coverage and rallied and tackled underneath. They stopped the explosive play playing over the top. Burrow didn't want to throw the ball over the top when he had the opportunity, and that leads to a disappointing offensive performance.
Yeah, it's a recipe that has stopped the Bengals in the past, and it's giving me flashbacks to other conversations we've had where if teams can rush 4 and play coverage and keep the ball in front of them and bracket chase every play, essentially, which is roughly the plan, if you can get that going, it makes things difficult for the Bengals offense, especially if Joe Burrow is hesitating. We saw that against Mike McDonald with the Ravens a little bit last year, and I think that we've seen that against these Shane Bowen defenses over the years as well. So another thing for the Bengals in this offense to improve upon. We do need to talk about this offensive line, however, a tricky performance, let's say, against a really good defensive front. And then we need to get to this defense as well, Mike, because the defense did help the Bengals in this game to get a win. And Joe Burrow very cognizant of that as well in his postgame. We'll finish the show with those topics coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time, which is the best way to buy tickets. They've got a new feature even that makes it easier to buy tickets. It's called Game Time Picks. It filters out all the fluff to just show you the most incredible deals on the greatest seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They make it easier than any other place to get those tickets with all-in pricing, views from your seat, Game Time ticket coverage, which means your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So if you're looking for tickets, maybe you're ready to take the jungle up to Cleveland and bring Cincinnati's presence to a road stadium that's been really difficult for the Bengals to play in over the years, well, Game Time is a great place to start. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets today with Game Time Picks. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. That's Locked On NFL. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Mike, we have talked about the offense for 20 minutes without getting to the offensive line, which had a bit of a letdown performance, I would say, compared to the last few weeks. They weren't as solid as in general we've seen them. The pockets were a little messier. Joe Burrow taking more hits, I think, than we've seen him take this year, under more pressure than we've seen him take this year, more affected by that pressure than we've seen this year. And it's pretty simple. Dexter Lawrence exists, and they have the secondary guys to punish you when you dedicate extra resources to Dexter Lawrence. And that is essentially what happened. Those extra guys, those ancillary guys, Brian Burns and Ojulari, they did punish the Bengals for sending those extra resources to Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah, it's an interesting game because some of it was Burrow invited. We talked about the sack that came from his rollout thinking he could avoid Ojulari, and he kind of did, but then got tripped up. But also you had the missed snap count where only they know if that snap was early or not, but the left side moved on time. The right side didn't move at all. And Ojulari ends up getting a hit on Burrow. Ball gets thrown away, not a sack, but still a big play. And Burrow takes a shot unnecessarily. But it's also not an indicator of Mims' talent either, because most of the game, Mims is fine. Mims is taking on his guy. And you can talk about this. The big part to me was that they knew the Bengals' protection on basically every play was they're going to take the center. And actually, the center would sometimes start sliding left. And if Lawrence was on the right, he's going to help Lawrence. No matter what, he is going to 97. 97 is going to pull Ted Karras on every play against whatever guard that Lawrence is facing. To go with that, on the opposite side, it wasn't just that those guys won because they had one-on-one opportunities. And I actually thought the Brian Burns had a sack on Orlando Brown. Other than that, Orlando was actually pretty good against him. But, hey, you bat 90% or whatever in this game, and that's not good because you end up giving a sack. And I actually, it's the only position group that kind of stinks where you have one bad play, that determines your night too. But it wasn't like he was getting beat nonstop and Burrow had to run for his life, and that sack was just a cause of that. It was the one real good pass rush that Burns had. He got him. But what they kept doing was when Karras would go to help Lawrence, they would run a stunt on the other side. And they ran both kinds of stunts, either the end coming first and the tackle looping around, the tackle coming first, the end looping around. The Bengals did a good job of passing off the end coming first and the tackle looping around, but they could not pass off until that 3rd and 12, the tackle coming down, trying to pick the inside hip of the offensive tackle and the end looping around right down the middle. That's where Burrow took the big shot from Brian Burns. He got the ball out, but had to go to the medical tent after. That's where he took a sack from Ojulari as well. It felt like, one, those are hard to pick up as offensive linemen because you need to be on the same level. When you don't have center help, it's just you two against those two. You're on an island. At times they got a chip, but mostly it was 5 out in the protection scheme, whether you're playing scat protection, jet protection, whatever. You don't have anybody on the line to help you. That running back isn't there to help the stunt pickup. So that tackle comes and he gets a pick. They can't pass it off. And they tried to man it. They tried to pass it. They had a couple that were passed off, but in general, they didn't do a good job of it. That was a good plan from the Giants side to stress the communication of the Bengals offensive line rather than just try to beat them straight up when they know the protection scheme. When you only have one way to beat the star, you kind of leave yourself a little vulnerable. They know how your resources are being managed here. But I do think that the tackle one is frustrating because it feels like it's just, we have talked about this for years. The guards set back kind of far. And it was an issue with that too, where they were able to pass off those end first tackle stunts, the ETs, because the tackle's setting out and he's still at an okay level to then pass the end off and then take the defensive tackle looping around. But when the tackle would come first, the guard is set too deep. It's not like the offensive tackles for the Bengals are jump setting out there or setting horizontally. They both set pretty vertical, but when the guard's getting more depth than them, they don't have, neither Volson or Kappa seem to have the strength to then push that guy forward and pass him off. Mm-hmm. So if you can't do that and you're not on the same level because you're setting so deep as a guard, that's tough. And you're only setting deep as a guard, I think, to pass these stunts. So just a little too deep. They need to be a little bit more flat when they're taking on these stunts. But that also leaves you susceptible whenever you jump set. We used to talk about Carmen all the time, jump set and then lose immediately. And that's also a bad way to live. So got to find a way to mix it up. Got to find a way to pass those stunts off because any team that has a star defensive tackle that knows what's going on, Chiefs, they could probably take this game plan if the Bengals don't improve upon their tech stunt pass offs.
They were better against the Chiefs. I thought from an offensive line perspective. Perhaps didn't have the performances from the edge guys to punish as much as the Giants did, where Ojulari and Brian Burns both had like 4 or 5 pressure nights with multiple hits between the two of them on the quarterback, sacks piling up. But the Giants lead the NFL in sacks, so perhaps they're just really good at that, and this is something that we should have expected. And it was 5-on-4 for most of the night. The Bengals not providing much in the way of chip help to the offensive line because the primary challenge is the defensive tackle. So the way that they game planned for that was we're just going to double the defensive tackle and let our other guys live on islands and deal with it. And they did deal with it, not always well. Mike, we need to get to the defense here as we've covered the offensive line, which, again, to be clear, like on the whole, there were opportunities there that the offensive line did allow for. It wasn't all an offensive line issue. There were offensive line issues. We're trying to be nuanced there in that conversation, right? Where Burrow's turning some things down where he had an opportunity to throw the ball and was able to stand in there and throw the ball against Baltimore last week, even on some offensive line losses, where this week those throws didn't happen, but then the offensive line did also have issues. Just so you're aware that we don't think this is fundamentally like only an offensive line issue. There's a little bit of blame, as you've noticed, to go around. And this doesn't even mention the running back fumbles. We talked about the Jamar Chase drop. Things still need to be better everywhere. And that includes on the defensive side of the ball, but the return of those veteran defensive linemen, BJ Hill certainly in a revenge game, Mike Hilton getting back this week, those additions and getting healthier on defense outside of Dax Hill, who's unfortunately got the ACL, have made a big difference to this team, especially on the defensive front, Mike.
Yeah, and it was run support. I thought Sheldon Rankins had a little bit of an up and down game, but one thing I noticed when he's in there is that he's a professional and he's able to at least hold up in these looks rather than get pushed way back into the linebackers. I felt like the linebackers probably enjoyed having a guy that took on 2 blocks and didn't just let them go get cleaned up in the run game. BJ Hill was incredible in this game with the pressures, with the run defending, and with his ability to get his hands up and knock some passes down. You mentioned Mike Hilton. I also think Jordan Battle, 2 defensive backs that provide really good run support in the game. And what the Giants did against the Seahawks was run all over them. And they had moments in this game where they were able to run the ball well, or at least okay enough to keep drives sustained. But it never felt like the Giants' run game was really taking over and it was unstoppable for the Bengals. And I give a lot of credit to that, to the defensive linemen that stepped up. And also I give some credit to that to the defensive backs providing good run support. We haven't seen a lot of good defensive back run support this year. And most of the time you see them come down and miss tackles or take a bad angle. So seeing Hilton and Battle come down there and play sound football was a welcome change. I think that was a big reason why the defense had a nice day, was just they were able to stop the run a little bit. They were able to force the Giants into some passing situations. The Giants, quarterback bailed them out at times in those passing situations. They got a little bit more pressure too. I felt like it wasn't like against the Commanders, it felt like Jaden Daniels could do whatever he wanted back there. It didn't feel like Daniel Jones could do whatever he wanted, whether that was Trey Hendrickson beating Andrew Thomas on the left side at times, or it was BJ Hill, whoever else in the interior getting some pressure and forcing him off of his spot.
Yeah, the pressure much more effective in this game against Daniel Jones, where they got roughly the same pressure rate, according to PFF, on Jaden Daniels and on Daniel Jones, with Daniel Jones completing just 5 of his 12 passes when under pressure in this game for 3.8 yards per attempt. And a lot of those coming at critical moments, between the Trey Hendrickson sack, BJ Hill creating an interception in the red zone on a true bozo play, and I'll keep calling it that, from Daniel Jones getting hit as he's trying to force the ball over the middle, and the ball predictably just floats up into the air. Daniel Jones also missing a number of deep shots where it looked like receivers were behind corners. So certainly you mentioned Daniel Jones helping to bail them out a little bit, that being the Bengals defense. That was part of the story. But I think in general, they needed this kind of performance from the defense where, they had a couple breaks go their way in missed field goals and in Daniel Jones' interception in the red zone. And it could have been worse from a success rate perspective, from a down-to-down perspective, from a Giants running the ball on 4th downs, which they should have stuck with more than they did when they turned to Daniel Jones in those situations. As you pointed out, it was not good for the Giants on 4th downs, but their aggressiveness and willingness to go for it on 4th down was largely because they get to 4th and 1 the entire game, or 4th and 2. And they're in these short yardage situations because they're staying ahead of the chains quite often. But despite that, they got the plays from BJ Hill. They got an important pass deflection from Sam Hubbard at one point. They're getting plays in the clutch from some of these guys where they needed them, where in the past, in weeks past, Cam Taylor-Britt getting a pass breakup on 4th down, or DJ Turner getting a pass breakup on 4th down. Those are instead completed passes in the last few weeks. And getting those couple of extra plays from BJ Hill, from Jordan Battle, from Mike Hilton, from DJ Turner, from Cam Taylor-Britt, who I thought had largely a pretty solid bounce back game outside of a couple of issues. Those are winning kind of plays for this defense, at least right now. And something that I mentioned this last night, the Bengals might need a similar kind of game. The offense could just play better and make this a non-talking point, but against the Cleveland Browns team that has a very clear strength on the defensive side of the ball, led by Myles Garrett, and a very clear deficiency on the offensive side of the ball, where they have been the worst offense through 6 weeks in Cleveland Browns history, which is a pretty low bar to somehow limbo beneath for the Cleveland Browns so far. Mike, appreciate it as always. You can find his work on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati and Bengals Talk SI, where he will have a film piece up weekly. We'll also make sure we continue to keep in touch with Mike over the course of the season here on Locked On Bengals. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.